I've got this ongoing chat with Dan Bilzerian. He's the former poker player and social media star, loads of followers on Instagram, more than 1 million on Twitter. And since October 7th, the guy has been aggressively anti-Israel, and many have said even anti-Semitic. Now, he rejects that second label. He says, I've got no problem with Jews. On the other hand, there's this quirk in the Jewish psychology that makes people think that they're better than everyone else and therefore justified in doing the most evil stuff possible just so they can keep their perch atop the world. So, for example, the Jews were behind 9/11, according to Dan. Why? So that they can goad the Americans to go to war in the Middle East and destroy Israel's enemies. Now think about that, right? The Jews faked an attack on American soil, 3,000 people dead, so that American soldiers can go to Iraq and Afghanistan, and the American public can spend trillions of dollars, and thousands of people die along the way, hundreds of thousands. Okay? That is some really evil shit, okay? Now, the Jews are behind, again, according to Dan, the JFK assassination so that the Israelis can build a nuclear bomb. The Jews are behind open borders, transgenderism. The Jews are pro-pedophilia. Everywhere there's a huge global problem, Dan sees a Jew. Now, me being a Jew and having Jewish friends and Jewish family, these ideas are ludicrous to me because I have yet to meet someone that fits this diabolical profile. But I'm open-minded. Maybe he's right. Maybe there is this secret cabal of Jews out there that are just running the world into the ground. It is possible, right? First of all, I'll give you two reasons. One is, if the last few years have taught us anything, it's that what we are being told by our governments and our media is part of the story at best. So, can there be people behind the scenes doing horrible stuff and they are Jewish? Sure, why not? And the second thing is, just because you're Jewish does not mean that you're a good person. There have been Jewish scumbags before. Harvey Weinstein is a scumbag. Bernie Madoff was a scumbag. There are others. So it's possible. So I picked 9/11, the 9/11 truther stuff to go. I went down that rabbit hole and I ended up with Kevin Barrett, who's the guest of this podcast today. Now, Kevin was one of the original gangsters, the OGs of cancel culture, because in the early 2000s, he was fired from his post at the University of Wisconsin Madison. At the time, he was teaching a course on Islam. And the reason he got fired is because he was one of the original 9/11 truthers. And when we spoke, he echoed what Dan has been saying, that the Jews, namely Benjamin Netanyahu, orchestrated 9/11 for the same goal, right? To destroy all of Israel's enemies in the Middle East. Now, you can imagine that someone like that does not think highly of Israel, and he doesn't. And he even called Hamas and Hezbollah heroes. So immediately he and I have quite a lot of distance in terms of how we view the world. But I want to play you one clip because this moment was this magical moment that really stood out for me.
The military resistance strategy, which I would not be one that we would want as our first option, but the basic position of Israel as a widely reviled and widely considered genocidal foreign settler colonial entity squatting in Holy Land that is holy to 5 billion people on earth, perhaps 10 to 15 million of whom, a tiny fraction of whom, are Jews. This outrageous situation can easily be solved militarily by raising the level of insecurity among Israelis to even a small fraction of the level of suffering and insecurity experienced by Palestinians, will cause the most productive Israelis to flee to greener pastures And it will not be long before Israel empties out of much of its Jewish population in the same way that Algeria emptied out of its French population circa 1960. That military plan is kind of a no-brainer, especially when you have 500 million Arabs in the region who are appalled by this genocide and this desecration, and 2 billion Muslims who are appalled by this genocide and this desecration of their holy landmarks, and this 5 billion people in the global south who are rising rapidly in terms of their power. So the military solution is not only realistic, but it's inevitable if something better isn't found.
But that's precisely what I'm getting at. This has been the case for about 100 years. This has been the plan, more or less. And it's just, if you look at what's going on right now, if you look at how much territory has been lost, settlers in the West Bank, settlements, gulfing up a lot of the land there, this continues to backfire.
Yeah, actually, you're right.
Now, you might be thinking, what's the big deal? Remember something, okay? Kevin holds the exact same views as every single Hamas and Hezbollah supporter out there. And he just admitted, when confronted with the consequences of his views, how counterproductive and self-destructive they have been thus far. To me, this is huge. Okay? Kevin is everybody else in that camp. He's no different. He might be smarter, he might be older, he might be wiser, he might be more well-read, but it doesn't matter. The point is this: you confront people with the logical next steps or the logical conclusion of their ideologies or their ideas. And you move away from the blame game, which is fun and easy because there's plenty of people to blame. But once you get pragmatic and you say, okay, you want to be violent? You want to destroy Israel as the goal and be violent as the method? How would you like to lose for another 100 years, oh Palestinians? You want to continue to militarily occupy the Palestinians? Jews? Really? If you move from what has been so frustrating from our media and these debate shows is the blame game. That's all this has been. It's just who's to blame, who's evil, who sucks. And that has gotten us nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. And in the meantime, people are dying. People are wasting their lives. People have been poor for far too long. It's crazy. It's madness. And rarely, if ever, does anyone say, guys, let's get real here. Let's stop. We're stuck in the past and we're not building a future here. And it's not an accident. The public conversation is so poor. It's impoverished because it's all about the past and it's not about building a future. Take your ideas and play them out in the future and see what happens. If that seems to you like a good path to go down, great. I'd love to hear about it. But if it's so obvious that the same things that everyone has been talking about for decades don't work, then you have to A, explain why you think your ideas are better or somehow different or somehow going to escape the consequences of this world. Or you have to admit you're wrong and rethink things and come up with better ideas. That's the beauty of that moment. That's the beauty of that admission. It's awesome. And it was great to talk to Kevin. I actually like Kevin. I didn't call him an anti-Semite. I didn't call him any names. It was a pleasant conversation, really. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to get real. I'm here to get fucking real. Enjoy the conversation.
So, talking with the Jew devil himself.
Wait, I'm the Jew devil?
No, only kidding. Nice to meet you. It's actually funny.
Yeah, likewise.
The reason I made that joke was I read your newsletter today, and you're not a fan of Zionists, it appears.
No, I've kind of gradually. I think I never was.
Okay.
I was very pro-Jewish for a long time. I was philo-Semitic, and then but I never was Zionist from the get-go. I saw that just this is ridiculous. These people are invading somebody else's land from across the seas, and and then lying about it. So that I got immediately. But all my Jewish friends were pretty much more or less that way to varying degrees too.
They were they're anti-Zionism.
Yeah. All my Jewish friends were either sort of not interested in it, or cynical about it, or outright anti-Zionist. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Man, I wrote this to you in the email, and I just want to sort of explain myself a little bit. But yeah, I found myself a couple of days ago in an argument with Dan Bilzerian, which I'm guessing you know who that is.
Yeah, Dan Bilzerian. Remind me a little bit more about it.
So he made a ton of money playing poker.
Oh yeah.
And then he started a social media account because he wanted to get laid as much as possible. I think in his book he even says something that one of his life goals was to have sex with a woman without ever having to say a word to her, which he accomplished. At least that's what he says in the book. So the idea is that he would take all these pictures and videos of him, with lots of expensive toys and lots of beautiful women around, and it would be this sort of compounding effect of more beautiful women and more rich people want to hang out with this mysterious guy. How is this guy pulling it off, and so on and so forth. And it worked. The guy's got a huge social media following. Anyway, lately, or at least I suppose since October 7th, he's been into Israel bashing and even a little bit of Jew bashing, or not even a little bit, some pretty significant Jew bashing. And then
I saw him on Piers Morgan. I think I saw that. Yeah.
Right. And I always find this stuff curious because, well, I'm a Jew. I've met a lot of Jews in my life, and none of us are up to the things that he accuses Jews of, having sex with underage children, being behind every single global problem, all that kind of stuff. And it just always makes me wonder, like, what's going on? What's going on behind the hood? And one of the things he accused Jews/Israel being behind was 9/11. And then I sort of went down that rabbit hole of, what actually happened in 9/11. And then your name popped up. And it's always kind of been a fascination of mine. The truther movement and all that kind of stuff, because it's such I don't know what it is. I mean, you have to explain it to me, but there's this definitive thing, that this event that shaped all of our lives, and there's all this footage, and there's people who saw the planes hitting the towers and stuff like that, and then there are people like such as yourself that maintain that isn't really actually what happened. So I want to know.
No, I'm not maintaining that the footage didn't happen, or that people didn't see planes hitting the towers, all that stuff. I've never said that. Yeah, but what I have said is it's just thunderingly obvious that the Muslims that were accused of hijacking those planes and flying into those towers obviously didn't do it, and it should take you like maybe a day or two of research to establish that beyond any reasonable doubt. And if you haven't, then I'd be happy to show you where to go to find that out.
Well, give me. I hope you will forgive me for being a little lazy, but walk me through it. I mean, how did you find yourself in that position where you were actually starting to research this stuff? And I know this was a long time ago, but What happened? How did you even find yourself in a position to research and investigate this?
Well, I was teaching an introduction to Islam class, among other classes, at the University of Wisconsin Madison. And I've been a Muslim since 1993. So I have lots of Muslim friends in this university town. And when 9/11 happened, well, basically all the Muslims, I mean, everybody I knew said, this is ridiculous. Obviously, this was not, Al-Qaeda doing this. And of course, Muslims, the best informed Muslims all over the world, all said the same thing. Mohammed Hakel, the Arab world's most respected political commentator, a former high-level Egyptian government official, his first reaction was, this is ridiculous. When I was at the top of the Egyptian government, we had totally infiltrated Al-Qaeda. Every time any of them sneezed, we knew it. And it wasn't just us, the Israelis, the Americans, the Saudis. Al-Qaeda is just a cat's paw for intelligence agencies, basically, is what Hakel said. And similar things were coming out of everybody from General Gul, the head of ISI in Pakistan, to basically everybody either said it or hinted at it, because it was universally acknowledged across the Muslim world that this official story is ludicrous. And so I heard this kind of from the whole Muslim world and all of my friends in Madison, Wisconsin, and I was like the last Muslim in Madison, Wisconsin that wasn't so sure what the truth was about this. And I said, well, let's hold off and figure it out. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't paying close attention for the first 2 years after 9/11. I had to finish my PhD, and I was teaching. I had a heavy teaching load, and my research area of interest is Moroccan Sufism. So I kind of let it go a little bit, said, yeah, we'll never really know for sure what happens, as all the other Muslims kept tapping on the shoulder saying, come on, man, are you kidding? You can't really believe this bullshit. And then 2 years later, at the end of 2003, I heard that David Ray Griffin, a very highly respected American intellectual, the go-to guy for resolving difficult empirical questions of all kinds, often scientific ones, was writing a book about this and saying that somebody blew up the Twin Towers, that whatever supposedly hit the Pentagon, it certainly wasn't hijacked Flight 77, and so on and so forth. And I said, well, if Griffin's saying this, I'd better look into it. So when the semester ended that year, I spent a couple of weeks doing research, and I was shocked. Not that it was a false flag, which I'd already thought might very well be, but that it was so obvious that the perpetrators had not even concealed their tracks, and only grotesque malfeasance by the media and I suppose the U.S. government, people whose job descriptions say they should actually look into this, that malfeasance was what had allowed these really, really sloppy perpetrators to get away with this totally botched put-up job. They didn't even make it look remotely like those buildings had fallen down from plane crashes and fires. They didn't even make it remotely look like these guys they were accused of hijacking these aircraft were actually Muslims at all, much less fanatical religious ones. And they hadn't made it even, remotely plausible that these guys could have possibly, hijacked a dog catcher truck, much less these jet airliners, much less actually flown them into these buildings. The whole story was preposterous beyond any, I have no words for how ridiculous this story is once one scratches the surface of the documentation that's presented to supposedly support it.
So, but you corrected me, and I wasn't trying to put words in your mouth when you said that you didn't deny that planes hit the World Trade Center, the towers, the Twin Towers. Mm-hmm. So who did that? I mean, who flies an airplane? That's a suicide mission, right? And the people on board and all that stuff.
No, it's not. Those planes could not possibly have been flown by human pilots. And here's why. Well, the first important thing is that the 9/11 Commission told us who these pilots supposedly were, these 4 hijacker pilots. And it told us that the best of the 4 pilots was a guy named Hani Hanjour. Now, Hani Hanjour was he may have had an 80 IQ, but I don't think so. Probably lower than that. He was an utterly incompetent individual who had been brought over because I think he was a very low-level snitch, probably a CIA snitch in Saudi Arabia. 15 of these 19 patsies who were set up and blamed as these supposed hijackers were all CIA snitches from Saudi Arabia. They were low-level snitches. Well, not quite all 15, but most of them, they'd all been brought over to the United States on the special type of visa that is offered only to those who do something for the CIA in Saudi Arabia. Okay, Hani Hanjour was one of those guys. He was such a bad pilot. He pretended to be. He was told. He was obviously ordered to pretend to go and take a couple of flying lessons. But he was so incompetent and stupid and utterly had no English that they wouldn't let him solo an Cessna training aircraft. Now, the 9/11 Commission told us he was the best of these pilots, and he supposedly flew the flight trajectory of Flight 77, which was allegedly hijacked over Ohio, far from New York. It had flown for like an hour before it was supposedly hijacked. And then Hani Hanjour supposedly flew it all the way from Ohio back to Washington, D.C., during which period it remained completely undetected by all civilian and military radar. This is after the towers had been hit. So then when he got this jetliner to Washington, D.C., Hani Hanjour, the guy who could not even take off in a Cessna training aircraft, supposedly dropped this thing in a very tight corkscrew dive, which probably would have pulled enough G's to render unconscious anybody on board. Really tight corkscrew dive, then level off at 560, I think it was, well over 500 miles per hour, skim the lawn of the Pentagon without leaving a scratch on it, and hit perfectly the spot to not harm any high-level brass or anything important, but to kill everybody in the accounting office and naval intelligence office. Okay?
So I would say
that feat of flying by Hani Hanjour in and of itself is so ludicrous that you know that when the 9/11 Commission tells you this, that they know they're lying and they think you're an utter idiot if you believe it.
I would say that the footage of the Pentagon collision it's not helpful, right? There's you see I watched it the other day, that you see I guess, what is it, like an outside camera just filming the area of impact, nothing, and then all of a sudden this big flash of lightning, but you don't actually see the slowdown of whatever incoming projectile. So you can't really make anything of it. I don't know if it's a plane, or I know there's some theories about whether it was a missile or not, but you jumped, and maybe I apologize if I cut you off, but you jumped to the Pentagon strike on that, but I'm still stuck on the Twin Towers. And how could that have been?
Well, wait a minute. If the Pentagon's, if they're lying that ridiculously about the Pentagon strike, then you know there's something really wrong with the whole thing, don't you?
I don't know if they're lying. I plead
okay.
Curiosity.
What about what I just what did you not understand about what I just told you about Hani Hanjour? You think that he was superhuman, that these guys were capable of making the first successful hijackings in decades in the United States and performing these superhuman feats of flying completely undetected by all radars, military and civilian, and completely unmolested by America's air defenses, which normally, the second you go off course, they're right there rocking their wings beside you in less than 10 minutes. And yet, in this case, this guy is they're flying around for over an hour. It's known that hijackings and then suicide hijackings are going on, no interference whatsoever, not picked up by radar, and the pilot is a guy who can't even fly a Cessna. You're going to believe that. I guarantee you, every one of those facts I just told you, it's going to check out. So what about that do you not understand, that that's a lie, what the 9/11 Commission is telling you?
If that checks out, yeah, that sounds pretty shady.
It does, to say the least. Okay, one more thing about the 9/11 Commission, that Toby, if you check this out, I guarantee you're going to wake up on this, which is they didn't even mention Building 7. There's no mention whatsoever of the destruction of the most high-level, ultra-secure building in New York City, the 47-story skyscraper with the CIA's biggest headquarters in the whole world outside of Langley, Virginia, and all sorts of other super high SEC top-level secret files on Enron and all that stuff stored there, and the New York City Emergency Management Headquarters, where they're supposed to be running the whole defense against 9/11, the reaction to 9/11, that building, the most important high security, ultra secret government building in all of New York, was blown up in an obvious controlled demolition at 5:23 in the afternoon that day. And the 9/11 Commission never even mentioned it. Does that bother you?
Okay. So you say that the two planes did hit the Twin Towers, but what took down the building itself was a controlled demolition, right? That's been your contention since day one, yes? So after you finish.
Well, sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, the mafia guy who bought the entire trade center 2 months before 9/11 and doubled the insurance, and then doubled that by claiming double indemnity. Larry Silverstein, who got his start in the sex industry, he's a mafiosi and built a real estate empire to front for his organized crime activities. Larry Silverstein, who put in the non-low bid on the World Trade Center 2 months before 9/11 and doubled the insurance, is on record confessing to being a party to the controlled demolition of Building 7. He confessed that we made that decision to pull and watch the building collapse on America Rebuilds video, a PBS video documentary that came out a year later. So the overinsured landlord of 2 months, who was obviously part of this, and I could go into a long story about why he's obviously part of this, is on record confessing to the controlled demolition of Building 7. Additionally, the countdown on police radio to the demolition, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom, and the whole crowd that's gathered to watch this, because actually it was broadcast on the radio that it was going to be taken down, is out there watching it. I mean,
wait, what? What was going to be broadcast on the radio? What?
Yeah. Numerous witnesses say that the reason that there was a crowd, which included, by the way, Amy Goodman of Democracy Now!, who's never talked about this, and she's told us why. Anyway, this huge crowd is out there watching as Building 7 is taken down, and many of them have testified that the reason that they came out was that there was an announcement on the radio that it was going to come down.
I mean,
among those witnesses,
the fact that those buildings were on fire. I mean, that should draw a crowd regardless, no?
Well, no high-rise, steel-framed high-rise building has ever collapsed from a fire in all of history.
No, I know.
Well,
I mean, this was global news. I mean, we all remember where we were at the moment when the planes hit. And if you were in New York City, I'm imagining you were going to go outside and take a look, right?
No, this is 5:23 in the afternoon. So this is like 7 hours after the towers collapsed. Okay. 5:23 in the afternoon. That's when people gathered to witness the controlled demolition of Building 7. There are a number of different videos of it because people were out there. And some of them have testified that the reason they came out was because they heard about that it was going to happen on the radio. And then at least one of them is on record and others not on record saying that they actually listened to the countdown on police radio to that demolition.
Who has the incentive to publicize this on the radio? I mean, I know you said that the people who perpetrated this were terrible at covering their tracks, but why announce it on the radio? I don't understand that.
You could ask why do this, why do that, about all sorts of things. I would guess that part of the reason that this whole thing was just so ridiculously sloppy was that the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. Because if, this whole thing required a fairly large number of participants, but obviously virtually none of those participants could be told the big picture. If you tried to tell them, well, what we're going to do here is we're going to murder 3,000 people in New York City, and we're going to stage an attack on the Pentagon in order to hijack America's military to destroy 7 countries in 5 years in the Middle East for the benefit of Israel. That's the truth. And if these people who participated in this had all known the truth, they would have rebelled. They would not have participated in it. So you would have a very small number that would know the big picture and the rest of them wouldn't. And so therefore, all these people who are carrying out various roles, but they don't know what's the big picture is, are likely to innocently put out information that they shouldn't have. For example, Jane Stanley of BBC reported that Building 7 had come down 20 minutes before it came down. Somebody had put out the report too early. Somebody who was part of the group that knew they were going to be demolishing it. And so there are all sorts of glitches like this. And again, it's because it's a big, complex operation that's so evil that hardly anybody could be allowed to know in advance what it was really about.
Yeah, so basically the claim is that the people who organized, orchestrated, and ordered this inside job in your telling were so evil that, as you said, that not only would they have thousands of people murdered in the most grotesque and theatrical way that anyone has thus far imagined, but also to use that as a pretext for thousands and hundreds of thousands of more deaths in the Middle East. And you're saying all this, these people who did this, is for the benefit of Israel?
Yes, absolutely. Now let me quickly explain the philosophy behind these people, or what like it is mind-boggling at first to think about.
You mentioned Enron and SEC. Like, there's a lot of strands that are going on here. So I'm forgive me if I'm struggling to keep up.
Yeah, ultimately, I think this was a national security operation, and the main nation whose security was being protected, quote unquote, was Israel. And Philip Zelikow, the head of the 9/11 Commission, basically admitted that once. I mean, he didn't name 9/11, but he said, well, why would we even care if Saddam Hussein got WMD? I'll tell you what the real threat is. It's a threat that dare not speak its name, and that's the threat to Israel. But we can't talk about that because it's a very hard sell. He actually blurted that out during a speech a few years after 9/11. But in any case, the reason that people who are charged with the national security of a nation would consider a deception and a treasonous murder in order to get into a war in which millions of people would be killed is that, well, this is the sort of thing that statesmen are often led to do by circumstance. Franklin Roosevelt did something like that when he participated in the famous 8-point plan to trick Japan or force Japan to strike first in World War II in order to drag the U.S. into the war, which was his objective. And so, the president of the United States participated in a plot to murder more than 2,000 American sailors in order to enrage the population, which was 80% anti-war before that, in order to make it possible to enter into World War II, which Roosevelt felt was important enough that it was worth doing that. So it's not like Israel was the only country in history.
And FDR, was that also a Jewish thing, or that's got nothing to do with it?
Well, the role of the sort of Jewish tribal chieftains and so on, the top level of Jewish tribalism, and it's definitely it was a big part of what pushed the U.S. into World War II. But I don't think it was the only thing. I wouldn't be calling Roosevelt as just a puppet of the Jewish forces or anything like that. But in any case, my point is that statesmen do this sort of thing for their nations. And indeed, there's a whole school of philosophy which has become, in some ways, the most influential school of political philosophy in the Western world, and certainly the United States, neoconservatism, which lionizes statesmen who precisely do this. And this was described by the famous neocon Michael Ledeen, who allegedly was involved in all sorts of false flag terrorism. He's Jewish, by the way, but he was working for the United States Empire in operations that didn't have that much to do with Jews. He was part of Operation Gladio, which murdered 200 innocent civilians in the Bologna train station bombing. This was a CIA operation during the Cold War. So Michael Ledeen said that, and he's speaking for the entire neoconservative movement, that the test of a great statesman, as Machiavelli said, and as the Jews know, he said that, we Jews are very much like Machiavelli, because we recognize that the test of a great statesman is he's willing to lose his own soul by committing the greatest possible evil in order to promote the interests of his state. And that's what Roosevelt did in tricking the United States into World War II through a murderous act of high treason, conniving in the murder of 2,000 of his own people in order to trick Americans into going to war. And that's what Netanyahu did in his helping orchestrate 9/11 in order to trick the American leadership, which was some of it was complicit, into entering these horrific wars in the Middle East in order to destroy the 7 countries in 5 years that the Israeli leadership sees as a threat. So it's not, it's quite rational, and indeed that these neoconservatives think that that's great to do this sort of thing. Like they think Lincoln was great to do to instigate the Civil War and kill huge numbers of Americans in order to create a stronger, more united United States. That this is what they lionize, and so this is not something that you would see as an exception or unusual.
If I the one of the issues I have in this thinking is that assume everything that you say is correct. The problems though that the Americans ran into and the British and all the other Western nations that invaded Afghanistan and then Iraq is that the war didn't really turn out as well as they thought, right? I mean, it just turned out to be one ongoing disaster. And Americans right now, I mean, the how much money was spent on these wars? Trillions of dollars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 7 or 8 trillion.
Right, exactly. And this is money. So this is money that was spent, and then there's all the interest on top of that. So Lord knows how much actually the real total is. So these wars worked out very, very badly. Well, neutral to bad, I would say, for American foreign policy.
But not
right?
for Netanyahu. Netanyahu is the one behind 9/11, and he's on record saying that it worked out great, that we are benefiting from one thing, and that is 9/11. He said that in, I think, 2009.
But even that, right? So when the Americans and their allies invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, and then of course eventually pulled out, some would argue that what actually ended up taking up the place of, let's say, Saddam Hussein was Iran and their proxies, which is pretty much what happened in Iraq, and up until I guess yesterday, Syria and then Lebanon, which present a far more immediate and present danger to Israel than Saddam Hussein ever did, right? And of course the same problem of you have a hostile foreign enemy that's going after nuclear weapons. So it's the same existential risk. How could Netanyahu claim credit or some sort of a victory here when things are just as bad as they were before 9/11?
Well, Netanyahu probably wouldn't think they are. The strategy here is laid out in the 1997 document, the Clean Break document, which Netanyahu commissioned. In fact, if you follow the career of Netanyahu, he's behind this whole thing, from the Jerusalem Conference on International Terrorism in 1979, where they laid out this: the next enemy after communism is going to be so-called terrorism, which is going to be essentially just the slur that we use to demonize Israel's enemies. And the West is going to go against terrorism, meaning Israel's enemies. That was his project. And he summoned George Bush, Henry Jackson, other high-level American policymakers to Tel Aviv for that Jonathan Institute conference in 1979. So then fast forward to 1997, and Netanyahu commissions the publication of the Clean Break document, which is a document that lays out precisely what they're going to do after 9/11 and what they're going to use 9/11 to do, which is to make a clean break with the whole history of how basically Israel's at war with the Arab world. And the Clean Break says we need to basically take out these. It didn't say the 7 countries in 5 years. That's what we heard from the neocons to General Clark after 9/11. But basically, that's more or less the same thing. So it says we're going to have to preemptively take out these anti-Israel governments in the Arab world, and then finally Iran. And so Iran has been saved for last because it's the big kahuna. The attack, the destruction of Iraq was precisely to put U.S. military bases controlled ultimately by Israel right up next to Iran. The purpose of invading Afghanistan was the same thing. It was all to surround Iran. The purpose of just overthrowing Syria, as everybody knows, and the purpose of committing genocide not only in Gaza but then in Lebanon was all to go against Iran. So the 7 countries in 5 years was this progression. They were hoping to do it in 5 years. They wanted to take out Iran in 5 years, but they were slowed down because realists, that is people in the American services and intelligentsia who are not loyal to Netanyahu's extreme Likudnik Zionism, said, this is crazy, we can't do this. If we go to war against Iran, we're going to have serious problems, et cetera, et cetera. So it's taken longer than 5 years. But they're still on the march with Netanyahu's plan, and 9/11 was the key event that enabled this plan to reach the point that it already has.
So in your mind, look, I admit that my bias is more pro-American and pro-Israel in this regard. And the way I think about these things is you have countries like Iran, you have Hamas, you have Hezbollah, you have these organizations that they don't hide their intention.
They're heroes.
Their desire
they're heroes. Here.
But
have you seen the book
just to finish the point, I mean, they don't hide their intention or their desire to see Israel destroyed. And how would you, if you were tasked with the security of Israel's citizens, how would you respond to groups like that who are actively plotting and training for your destruction and the destruction of millions of?
Yeah, I would bring on this man, Miko Peled. His father was the general who supposedly saved Israel in yeah, I've had him on my podcast.
No kidding. Okay.
Yeah, of course. And
so
yeah, he's been repeatedly saying that, come on, Hamas, they're heroes. Hezbollah, they're heroes. Well, of course they want to, quote unquote, destroy Israel. What is Israel? The word Israel is, well, it's many things, but as a word for this settler colonial occupation of Palestine, it's a euphemism for the genocide of Palestine. Think of it, if you were one of these people, if you'd been living somewhere, your community had been in this place for a long, for basically forever, and suddenly these messianic millenarian lunatics from across the seas invade your country and expel you from your lands and use all kinds of chicanery to steal your land, and then finally, trick the world into these various mass slaughters and wars that lead to the expulsion and extermination of your people. What would you do? I mean, if you're a hero, you fight back, and that's what the resistance does. And honestly, I find it. I mean, a lot of Israeli leaders, even the hardcore Jabotinsky type Israeli leaders, many of them have made these kinds of remarks like, well, yeah, if I was a Palestinian, of course I would be fighting with Hamas. Of course I would be fighting with resistance. I wouldn't accept my land being invaded. I wouldn't accept these invaders from across the seas coming and exterminating and expelling my people, raping and bayoneting thousands of people, and mostly women and children in 1948, to terrorize everybody else into fleeing, strafing the survivors as they fled from the air. I mean, the horror of that Holocaust of 1948 in itself is enough to completely delegitimize this whole settler colonial project. And people like Miko Peled and other brave ex-Israelis are aware of this. And why aren't you?
There's a lot there. Okay, so settler colonial, they were not a colony of any other empire. They were trying to establish their own independent state from the get-go. So I think that argument is, I don't buy that argument. You said that Palestinians.
Everywhere else, settlers have gone from the Western world to the non-Western world and established their own society. That's called settler colonialism.
But not on behalf of an empire. That's the colonialism part. Yes, there is a settler aspect to this, of course, because people had moved there. I'm not denying that at all. But the colonialism part, I think that's false, I would say. The bit about, here's where it gets a little tricky. The bit about, you said that the Palestinians have been there forever. That a Arab / Christian / Muslim population has been living in, call it what you want, Israel, Palestine.
Jewish too.
Yeah, Jewish too, of course, right? But that's not exactly the point. I'm just addressing the issue that you said the Palestinians have been there forever. Jewish
Palestinians were murdered and ethnically cleansed too. I have a friend whose much of his family was murdered. He was a Jewish Palestinian, and he was part of the indigenous population of Palestine that was murdered and expelled by the Zionists in 1948. And half of his extended family was killed. And he ended up converting to Islam because his whole family mass converted to Islam afterwards because they were so disgusted with Judaism, with what these invading Zionist Jews had done in committing genocide against them, indigenous Palestinian Jews.
Who was this? Where was this? Where did this take place?
This was a friend of mine, a guy I knew at the University of Wisconsin Madison.
Mm-hmm.
And
where did this person live?
I met him when he was attending graduate school at the University of Wisconsin Madison. He was a member of the Muslim community in Madison.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you said that he was a Jew living in Israel Palestine at the time, mandatory Palestine, and
his family, yeah. In 1948, his family, they were Arab Jews. I assume you might be an Arab Jew. I mean, do you have Moroccan background? Your name sounds Moroccan.
I have I have Sephardic background. That's the last name. So
cool.
Yeah. Probably some.
Well, that most Sephardic people. I mean, that is Arab, right? I mean, here in Morocco, there are lots of Moroccans who happen to be Jewish, but they're still Moroccans, and they're still welcome back here to Morocco when this settler colonial project falls. Those Jews are Arabs, just like other Moroccans, because their first language is Arabic. That's what Arab. Yeah. All Arab means is your first language is Arabic.
Okay, so just in response to I'm giving you my opinion as to why I'm a fan of the state of Israel. So that the point about the Palestinians being there forever, as far as I have read, the idea of a Palestinian collective consciousness, aka the Palestinian nation, is a 20th century invention. Now, I don't say the word invention with any sense of. I'm not trying to be derogatory. Every nation is invented. All
nations are inventions, obviously.
Right. Okay. So that's just a neutral sort of when history started. So what it was before, again, as far as I'm aware, these were more what would you call sort of familial bonds or bonds based on your specific geography. But I would say that as far as the Muslims are concerned, Muslim Palestinians, that Islam was the fabric that was binding people rather than some national thing that, nationalism was a European construct that was exported into the region. And,
yes, I agree.
So it also, I have to say that when I look at the Palestinian national movement critically, and I try to be fair to both sides in such that I give them equal weight in terms of their own individual responsibility. And I must say that the people that you call heroes have been wildly incompetent in terms of the amount of value and destruction that they've brought to the region versus uplifting people and giving them a better life. And that's been the case essentially since this whole terrible conflict has started, that Palestinian leaders have been short-sighted, narrow-minded, jealous, petty, corrupt, and this does not make for people who you wish for to have that broad-minded. You want people to have a good life and live in full dignity, and this applies to everyone. I don't care what you are, and electing people who are the type of people that I just described it's just not going to get you where you need to be as a society and as for individuals.
So just so I can clarify this,
yeah.
You're saying that the Palestinian leadership in general has been incompetent, and then also not dedicated to trying to make a better life, but and so Miko Peled again. He says that these people are heroes to the extent that they resist their own genocide, and I think that what you're missing is that the basic problem here is this slow motion genocide against the Palestinians, and the reaction. I would say I'm not sure if the Palestinians have been incompetent and corrupt more than anyone else. But certainly the regional forces and the international anti-genocide, anti-colonization, anti-imperialism forces, I think, have been pretty incompetent in stopping this. But I think, blaming, it's like if you said, well, the people in the Warsaw Ghetto, suffered a terrible fate because they didn't, work with the Germans effectively to provide a better life for themselves. Well, they didn't,
So,
right? Okay, but it's not really their fault. I mean, the problem is that they're genocide victims, and the same is true of the Palestinians. And if the Palestinians haven't been competent enough in resisting their own genocide, well, yeah, maybe not. But that's not really an excuse for the genocide perpetrators, is it?
Kevin, the problem with the analogy is in the Warsaw Ghetto, Jews were prisoners that didn't have an army or a state or a government apparatus or taxes or any of the things that Hamas had in Gaza or the Palestinian Authority has in the West Bank. Limited, not perfect.
Well, if they were competent, they would have had all those things.
And under occupation, I grant you all those things, but they had way more weaponry than the Jews ever did in the Holocaust. And they had way more sovereignty than the Jews ever did in the Holocaust. So that analogy, for me, it doesn't hold any water. But
no, when
I say incompetence with this, it's like you've had now basically 100 years of this nightmare, and never is there a corrective movement within the Palestinian national movement that says, "Boy, I wonder." Maybe our strategy is just really not working. Like, look at Gaza today, look at Gaza in 2021, look at Gaza in 2014. This is not good. This is really, really not good. And to feed this false hope that, we just continue to rearm ourselves and we continue to invest whatever money we can in our crumbling economy into destroying Israel, that someday this is all going to pay off, and the lesson never sinks in that they're up against a nuclear superpower that throughout the last 30 years, there has been a wide swath of the country that has wanted to make peace. I'm not saying everybody, and that it fluctuates every once in a while, but at least half. And I'll tell you this, just from a personal point of view, but I do think that this is representative, is that after October 7th, there was a lot of, among the shocks of October 7th in Israel, was this idea of, my God, is peace finished? And if peace is finished, do we have to kill every single one? Right? To be confronted with that genocidal thought of, how does this end? How do we make sense? And you heard a lot of this stuff, right? We have to wipe out Gaza. We have to do this. We have to do that. And horrible things that people, that their thoughts that were entering into.
No, I was just saying it. They're doing it. They've committed genocide, according to Amnesty International, the ICC, the ICJ, the United Nations Special Rapporteur. The whole world knows this is the most fully documented genocide. You can argue about whether there was a genocide of Jews during World War II. That is arguable. This isn't arguable. This is being live streamed, and the perpetrators are bragging and proudly live streaming their genocide. I mean, this is insane.
Well, just to finish the point on the leadership, though, and then we'll get to the genocide, because I think it's worth exploring as well. But you do have a very significant portion of Israelis who want to be finished with this. They don't want constant wars with their Arab neighbors.
If Israel wanted the two-state peace, they had it on a silver platter. They still have it. Well, maybe not now. Maybe since the genocide, they don't anymore. Maybe now the entire world hasn't realized we are going to have to destroy Israel. That wasn't just rhetoric. We now do have to destroy Israel. That's obvious because Israel is completely out of control. But before the genocide, that wasn't the case. Everybody, including Hamas, was totally on record about, you pull back to those pre-1967 borders and we lay down our arms. what part of that do you guys not understand?
Yeah, but
that has been the Hamas position from day one.
What? Have you read the charter, man?
Yes.
It's horrible.
Yeah,
it's horrible.
Yeah.
No peace with Israel. What are you talking about?
No. Okay, there's first Hamas charter is blah, 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 blah. Second Hamas charter.
Hold on a second, man. Don't blah, 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 man. That's the blah, blah, blah is the point, man.
Well, that's okay. They've got this. There's a rhetorical.
The blah, blah, blah says kill the Jews.
Rhetorical, whatever. Look. Nobody serious doubts that if Israel, anytime since the mid-1990s, had indeed been willing to fully withdraw from all occupied territories seized in 1967, that the entire region, including Hamas and everybody else there, would have laid down their arms. The only caveat was that Hamas's position is that this is going to be a perpetual truce. The reason that Israel supposedly didn't find this acceptable was because Hamas said, we still will be working for the dismantling, quote unquote, Israel, which is this Jewish supremacist state. We don't want a Jewish supremacist state. We want an Islamic state. We want to work for that, but we'll work for it peacefully. We'll put down our weapons and we'll work peacefully through the political system to have our ends. That's been the Hamas position. It's been very, very clear, essentially from day one. Although that first charter again was blah, 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 blah. But it's
Come on.
The actual negotiating reality since then has been clear. And you really cannot believe, Kobe, you know that the Israeli leadership, after they murdered Rabin, in order to prevent this from happening, that the Netanyahu crowd, which has the support of the dominant players, they actually, according to Alan Hart, I think I have his book here somewhere, Zionism, the Real Enemy of the Jews. Anyway, highly recommended. Alan Hart, the former lead BBC commentator and correspondent for the region, personal friend of Golda Meir and Yasser Arafat. In his book, he quoted a top-level source. I don't know if it couldn't have been Golda Meir. This was after her period. Israeli source saying that they actually did a literal blood oath. They actually pricked themselves and signed a blood oath not to give up the occupied territories. So
who took the blood oath?
It's everybody, but the guy who was tearing his hair out and telling this to Alan Hart.
Okay.
And I believe it was the guy. Alan Hart at the time promised not to disclose the identity, and I'm not sure if Hart ever did disclose the identity of this extremely high-level Israeli source. In any case, the real story of this, as you would know if you've read this carefully, is that after murdering Rabin to make sure that they wouldn't ever give up these 1967 stolen territories, that the top Israeli leadership has been, the dominant force has been the Netanyahu crowd, which is pushing for greater Israel. Right? I mean, they not only don't want to give up those occupied territories, they want, ultimately to keep moving towards, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are quite honest about everything from the Nile to the Euphrates belongs to us, right? So that's what we're up against, and that's why the entire region now, along with most of the the world's global South and Muslim populations, is basically now on board finally with the rhetoric about the only solution here is going to be the complete destruction of Israel.
So many open threads, but just off of this, I think that among the many consequences of October 7th is, as I was alluding to before, or what I was describing before, that this sense of there's no negotiation here, there's no settlement here. This has to be achieved only through force, and force we mean killing and misplacing of millions of people.
Why not just withdraw to pre-67 borders?
Oh, hold on a second. I'm getting to what I'm trying to say. Now, obviously, I don't want that, and I don't think the reason why you have such a significant percentage of Israelis who oppose this, who or even at the thought of it, they it's because they don't want this on their conscience, right? What I'm trying to say is that Israelis, Jews, whoever, they're human beings, and they understand what it means to go to war. They really, really do. I don't think that they take this really lightly, and I don't think they have some sort of bloodlust for Palestinians or Arabs or Muslims or Christians or so on and so forth. But there are some who do, and I don't know if it's Ben-Gvir or Smotrich. They make some noises that I don't particularly like, but it's asinine to think that this situation is sustainable in the long term. And the longer this drags out, and the more brutal wars, and I'll say this, you don't have to agree with me, but terrorist attacks like on October 7th, the stronger that voice becomes of, well, hey, Jews, it's been 100 years and they're not listening and they don't want to come to any kind of a negotiated settlement. Why don't we expel them all, or why don't we kill them all, or whatever, right? And all it takes is one charismatic, smart individual to make that case, and we might find ourselves there. So I'm very motivated to not get to there. I just enough, for me as a Jew, 2,000 years of this shit. It's I've had my fill. We don't need any more of this nonsense. Like we can actually just more or less draw the borders where they are, and then just live in peace together. And the Palestinians focus on their well-being and their dignity and their full potential, and the Jews do as well, and everyone else in the Middle East. Like this there's no law of physics says that we can't actually have any of these things. We can get there. So,
well, Kobe, I think it's going to be tough in the wake of this genocide, but in a sense, this genocide does offer sort of one last opportunity, I think, I think what it would take really to get where you want to go would be basically follow. I think if more Israelis follow this journey that Miko Peled followed, and fully, to actually genuinely reach out and try to understand the perspective of the other, not just as a quick, one-off, like so many of these, like I quoted all these, the famous right-wing Jabotinsky Israeli leaders who say, oh yeah, sure, if I were Palestinian, I'd be fighting as hard as I could too, just like they do, right? Well, but then it's a one-off, and then they say, oh, and because that's the inevitable situation when we invade and steal their land, then we're just going to have to keep invading and stealing their land and have more power than them. No, what you guys need to do is be like Miko Peled and, have some common sense and some humanity and some compassion for the other, and say, oh my God, we've done a terrible thing. This whole thing, we've been doing a terrible thing to you guys forever. October 7th, that would never have, that represented a desperate move by people being subjected to genocide. The nonviolent protests in Palestine have been constant, high level, constant, just ongoing. And, one of the biggest was the Great March of Return. And then, these kids go up to the wall saying, we want to go back to our land, and boom, they get shot down. And sometimes they're shot to be blinded. I forget how many thousands of these nonviolent Palestinian demonstrators, mostly kids, were permanently maimed. And that's been the general response of Israel to nonviolent protest. So it's not like Palestinians have all been doing nothing but armed resistance. Armed resistance has been a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the nonviolent resistance, but it hasn't been heard. So what the Israeli people who, with good hearts like you, need to do is realize that Miko Peled is right. And what you need to do is say, oh my God, we just committed a genocide. What we've been claiming the Nazis did to us during World War II, and if you want to go there, that's been grossly exaggerated too. But yeah, maybe it was a genocide. It was pretty bad. Whatever it was, whatever you guys say the Nazis did to you in World War II, you've done worse to the freaking Palestinians. It's time to open up your hearts and admit that and say, my God, look what we've done, and break down crying and beg the Palestinians, what can we do to earn your forgiveness? That's the only way that this can end, because the way I see it going right now is like Syria collapses, it's another Libya, and guess what? There are all kinds of crazy jihadis running around in Syria with connections to very, very wealthy Arabs. And guess what? Delivering nukes into Israel, or whatever else, latest, whatever they've invented now, there are rumors about energy weapons and various types of things. Something really bad is going to get delivered to Israel out of Syria. Israel will respond with its Samson option and nuke Mecca and nuke a couple of European cities, just lash out. And Jews are going to flee Israel. There's this, and then they're going to be hunted down and killed everywhere they go. It's going to be the rocks and trees hadith from the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him. God forbid that ever comes true. But that's where we're headed right now. And the Jewish paranoia going back 3,000 years that Laurent Guyénot has so ably described in his book From Yahweh to Zion, that is going to be realized if the people, if Israel and the Jewish nation cannot find it in their hearts to beg the Palestinians for forgiveness for this atrocious crime that they've committed against these people. I mean, and not just the Palestinians, but the people of the whole region. I mean, the biggest cause of all of the suffering and horror in that region is this genocidal state in the Holy Land. And it's a festering cancer on the whole world. I mean, that radical change of heart of Israeli people and their supporters around the world is really the only thing that's going to ever turn this around.
Why is Israel a cancer to, I don't know, the 100 or so million Egyptians that never see an Israeli, don't know, have no contact with Jews, just living their lives? Why does Israel have any? Why should someone in Egypt or Qatar or Kuwait or any of the 20 or so Muslim countries give a damn about? Give a damn isn't the right word, but how is it exactly that this cancer is affecting their life? Like, why can't they get on with their lives? Why is it that Israel takes up this disproportionate amount of attention in the greater Muslim and even in the West? Like, why is that? Why do you think that is?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that, for instance, Egypt right now is suffering just utter national humiliation after having been defeated by Israel in 1967, and then a few years later, having a evening things up a little bit, but not much. And basically, Egypt is under Western occupation, as is Morocco, the country I live in today, and the rest of the Arab world. The whole region basically has either had to live under vicious dictators who repress the people's sympathy with the genocided Palestinians and repress the people's desire to defend the Muslim holy places, in particularly, and the Christian holy places. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, as you know, is the oldest and greatest Islamic architectural monument and the symbol of Islam's spirituality and its mission to bring together and protect all of the Abrahamic monotheisms. That's where the Prophet Muhammad.
Is not the Kaaba?
Sorry?
Is not the
No, I'm talking about the Al-Aqsa Mosque is the mosque where Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, did a miraculous night journey, perhaps leaving his body or perhaps miraculously flying from Mecca to
on a horse.
Jerusalem, and then rising through the seven heavens in a visionary experience or shamanic kind of journey, and encountering the other prophets, including Jesus and Moses, and finally entering into God's presence. This is the supreme spiritual experience in the Islamic religion, and it's all centered on the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Not when Muhammad was in the cave and he first received the instructions from Gabriel to read the Quran, to recite the Quran. That wasn't the most profound experience.
That's that opening moment of revelation that is enshrined in the Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, read in the name of your Lord, surah. That is it's a kind of momentous occasion of the coming of revelation. But in terms of the aspirations of ordinary Muslims, and especially Sufi Muslims and other spiritually engaged Muslims, the template for that is this shamanic journey, the night journey, or the Miraj, and that night journey is centered on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which again is the oldest and greatest Islamic architectural monument. I guess there's some people who might argue for the Taj Mahal as the most artistically successful. I don't know,
right.
but for me, like for instance, when I was teaching Intro to Islam at the University of Wisconsin, and I would be talking about how is there a distinction between Christian, Muslim, and Jewish views of God, I would show the Sistine Chapel as the sort of anthropomorphized version that in particular Christianity has had, right? The picture of God the Father and God the Son and so on, the creation. And then I would show the ceiling of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, of the Dome on the Rock, as this fractal exploding multiplicity out of oneness. and the primordial unity of God. And this is actually the mystics of all traditions, including especially Jewish mystics, would probably relate to that as well. But that image on the ceiling of the Al-Aqsa Mosque is a good comparison with the Sistine Chapel ceiling for the difference between the more mystical Godhead version of God that we get in Islam, as opposed to the more anthropomorphized father and son sort of thing that we get in Judaism and Christianity. But in any case, Al-Aqsa Mosque is a supremely important Islamic monument, and it is under threat. There are crazy satanic and not some non-consciously and some consciously satanic millenarian messianic maniacs who are dedicated to this project of destroying that mosque and building a blood sacrifice temple in order to bring back their Messiah, a Jewish Messiah who would be a military conqueror who would once and for all subjugate the Goyim, or the non-Jews, to the Jews and rule the world, and it will be happy ever after under the rule of the Jewish Messiah and the supremacy of the Jews, each of whom will have 2,000 or 3,000 Goyim slaves. This is the messianic project of a certain group of people, as opposed to the Christians and the Muslims who are praying for Jesus, the Prince of Peace, to come back and help us love each other and achieve spiritual enlightenment.
Yeah. So you're saying that Muslims and Christians aren't signing up for this? They're not finding one another to sign up for the Jewish Messiah. Anyway, so you were talking though about humiliation with Egypt, because I wonder, why is it that this fixation? Why? Why
genocide in the Holy Land? Why wouldn't that just be devastating to all of the world's Christians and Muslims? The genocide of Christianity, the crucifixion of Christianity and Islam in their own Holy Lands by invaders. Why wouldn't that just be a thorn in the side of all Christians and Muslims?
So what is your definition of genocide?
I would go with the standard definition under international law, which came out of after Nuremberg. And if you read papers by people like Francis Boyle of the University of Illinois, and there are others, but Boyle is one of the easiest to find on the internet, you'll get a very detailed argument that Israel has been deliberately trying to remove Palestinians from their land by making by killing them, by expelling them, by making their lives unlivable in all sorts of ways, and that's been going on since 1948.
So a genocide is sporadic. Because let me describe what I've.
It's the destruction of a people. It's the destruction of a people.
But how is it that this nation is being destroyed when they have one government in Gaza and one quasi-government in the West Bank, and they're able to collect taxes and essentially raise an army? I mean, how is that? How would you describe that as the destruction of a people? Now, I know that they've been kicked out of their homes and things like that, and some of them fled, but
they fled under threat of murder and rape and having their babies and their women bayoneted.
Yeah, and also some of them are encouraged to leave, right? But
that's encouragement, I guess.
Well, I meant from Arab leaders, but I take your point. But how would you explain the fact that there's far more Palestinian? I mean, the Palestinian population is way bigger than it has been, and it just continues to increase. So, what kind of a genocide is that? I don't understand that.
Well, the majority of the Palestinian people, of course, are now out. Not only outside of their homes, the vast majority have been expelled from their homes, and their property has been stolen. And the UN has repeatedly passed resolutions saying that they have to be given back that property along with reparations and penalties. So they've had their property stolen. Virtually all Palestinians have had their property stolen. And the majority now live outside the borders of historic Palestine, many in long festering refugee camps. So Israel has succeeded in destroying the Palestinian lives of the vast majority of Palestinians.
Yeah, but the side in the genocide means death of, killing of. They're alive. There's many.
Well, if you read the definition under international law, genocide does not mean killing every last individual. It means destroying a people by a combination of killing, expelling, and various other kinds of actions, oppressive actions that make their lives
But then
difficult or impossible.
why use the word genocide? I mean, when I think of suicide, I don't think of myself as quitting my job and divorcing my wife and throwing off all and just killing the sort of amorphous version of myself. Suicide is I'm dead, right? And so it's fratricide and whatever other side you want. So genocide, I would imagine would be what happened to, I think it was what the Turks did to the Armenians, what happened to the Jews in the Holocaust.
Well, wait. Let's talk about that. The Turks
Yeah,
and the Armenians. What in that case, Armenian populations were ordered to leave, and they were marched off into various places. And in some cases, some were shot. But I think the majority of the people who died perished along the way on these marches, very much like the people fleeing Palestine after the mass murders and bayonettings and rapes and so on of 1948. And indeed, many tens of thousands of Palestinians did die during that ethnic cleansing or Holocaust of 1948. So that was very comparable. And lots of Armenians survived that horrible experience, just like whatever happened in those German concentration camps, and it was horrible, especially by the end. There were a whole lot of survivors, rather huge numbers of survivors. But we could still, and indeed, I think the Nuremberg people, post-Nuremberg, when they wrote that definition of genocide, they did that with that in mind. That is that that basically just when one a people is targeted for destruction, the many kinds of means that are applied, often include murder, but are not limited to murder. Right now, we're seeing the murder aspect of this genocide of Gaza, though, go just off the charts. I mean, virtually all Gaza has been completely pulverized. Food has been withheld, water has been withheld, medicine has been withheld, and people are dying in droves, both from murder, including sport murder by invading Israelis, and then just random people dying of malnutrition, of festering wounds, of diseases, of exposure, and especially of buildings collapsing on their heads and dying slowly under the rubble of buildings, slowly squeezing the lives out of them. And I've seen this for well over a year now, virtually every day, been watching this and seeing these images and seeing some of the sadistic images that Israelis have been posting about what they've been doing.
sure.
And, frankly, I can't imagine really anything more despicable. I mean, and again, I mean, I'm sensing a general agreement right now among probably billions of people that at some point Israel just has to be destroyed by any means necessary, Samson option or no Samson option.
I'm wondering how do you explain? Have you ever been to Israel?
No, I haven't. Frankly, if I went now, I suspect, it wouldn't be good for my health.
Oh no, man. Well, first of all, you should come. I think you should experience these things for yourself. And look, I lived there for 14 years, and
Would life insurance cover me if I took out a policy before I went?
I'm telling you, man, nobody would touch a hair on your head. Trust me. Really, I'm quite sure of it. So,
is that because I'm white? If I were Palestinian, if
come on.
if I had an Arabic name and I had brown skin and I was of Palestinian American ancestry, would I have that same assurance?
Well, to be fair, that is a bit different. If you have Palestinian, I don't know if you're from Iran or if you're from Lebanon, Israel does have a reason to check what the hell you're doing there. But if you're talking about simply if you're all of a sudden but you've got black skin or you've got an Arabic sounding name, not necessarily. But yes, that does raise the chances that you're going to get checked and stopped and so on and so forth. But as far as when you're inside the country and you've been checked and you've got nothing to hide and you're up to nothing nefarious, you'll be fine and you'll enjoy yourself because there's lots of beautiful things to see, including the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which I believe as a Muslim you're allowed to go and see. So, and Jews are not. But I lived there for 14 years, and my kids were born there, and they went to school there. And I'll just give an example because there's 2 million Arabs that are Israelis, Israeli Arabs, whatever you want to call them. I leave that up to them. But one of my sons went to a school in Tel Aviv, and two of his teachers, in fact, actually were Arabs. I think they might have been Christians, but I'm not sure. I think they lived in Yaffo, in Jaffa, and just would come, and I would drop off my kid, and he would be so excited to go to school, and the teacher would come and give him a hug and a kiss, and it was just normal. And there was nothing in the school, in the system, that educated my kids to hate Arabs or hate Palestinians or hate Muslims or Christians or anything like that. Why am I saying this? It's because leaders are byproducts of their communities, right? They get inculcated with values, they get inculcated with history, and so on and so forth. And then they rise to the top of that because they're the ones who are deemed the most, well, either the most connected, but most of the times it's, I would hope anyway, the most competent people who can progress the interests of said group. And as having sent 3 kids to schools in Israel, and also just growing up in our house where we didn't talk about hating anyone else. We didn't talk about any of these things at all, obviously. Even when there was war, I don't. And then I look around me. I mean, Tel Aviv is this bustling metropolitan with wonderful restaurants and a beach, long coastline, and there's a high-tech sector. Like, there's a lot of positive stuff going on in the country. That doesn't suggest to me that the underlying ethos is, of extreme paranoia, and we must, dominate the entire world, and we must, have a greater Israel, and nobody can live in peace with us as fully self-actualized individuals. And again, when I repeat about having this huge, significant proportion of Israel that is pro-peace and desperately wants this. I mean, if you look at, for example, I was a reporter at the time when the Abraham Accords were signed, and there was just the Israelis were flying in droves, mainly to the UAE, but also to Morocco, because they felt, this is another interesting part of the Jewish psyche, but they actually felt finally as if, the world, the goyim, if you want, the world, they accept us for who we are. And finally, we can sort of talk and be normal about it. But it doesn't strike me as the kind of
Abraham Accords.
Go on, sorry.
Yeah, if Abraham Accords had come with that withdrawal from the 1967 territories and a durable peace agreement, I think we'd be like welcoming you in open arms here in Morocco. But because the Abraham Accords were basically this surrender thing after Israel had blown up the Twin Towers, murdered 3,000 Americans in order to launch these hijack America's military to murder 30 million people, and in service to Netanyahu's clean break plan for the region, and then basically rub all of our faces in this. The Abraham Accords were viewed by everybody who's paying attention as just a horrific thing that was setting up something inevitable, like what happened October 7th. I mean, that's if there hadn't been any Abraham Accords, there wouldn't have been any October 7th. Abraham Accords were just a disaster.
How do you get from Abraham Accords to October 7th? A peace deal? You have
the Abraham Accords is this damned government in Morocco stuck in this position where, in order to ensure its own territorial integrity, it feels compelled to rubber stamp the genocide of Palestine and the impending destruction of Islamic holy places and the continuing persecution of Muslims and the continuation of this greater Israel project that threatens all of Israel's neighbors. And Morocco's far away, and it's got this huge problem with its Saharan territories, and so it's forced into this national humiliation of signing this, and the same with these other countries. And the reason that they signed, the reason that the Saudis were willing to talk about doing this was that they assumed that the Israeli leadership was sane enough to realize that this has to be a step towards those going back to the 67 borders. That's what's good. That's because we all know that's what it's going to take. That's when peace happens. That when Israel finally does that. But it's never going to, because they murdered Rabin and they took a blood oath, right? I mean, so the Palestinian people are stuck. The only thing they can do is armed resistance. The only thing the rest of us can do to help them is armed resistance. So of course, if it's not October 7th, it's going to be a nuke going off in Israel.
Okay, so hearing you, right, and put yourself in the shoes of an Israeli right now. Again, you have a society of, as far as I can tell, right, and no one's hiding, but these are normal people who send their kids to school, do their jobs, try to be productive members of the world, and then they die. Okay, they don't have these grand designs to ruin lives in Morocco or Egypt or wherever else, right?
Well, and they don't like the crazy settlers, so why don't they reel them in, bring them back?
I'm getting to that. So then you have someone like you who says, look, the only way this ends for the benefit of humanity, essentially, is that we tear down this society that, again, full of people who just send their kids to school, normal people, right? Totally normal people who really have no hatred in their hearts, for the most part, right? I'm not talking about everyone, but for the most part, Israelis, normal people. You have to tear down this entire society, and if we have to nuke them. Now, if I'm living in this society and I hear this, as I've been hearing this from Palestinian leadership for decades, 100 years now, and also in the Arab world with Nasser and so, and even the Iranian regime, you hear it even more now with Erdogan and the Turks, is that we have nothing to apologize for the way we live presently right now. Now, I'm happy to live with you in peace, but if you're going to threaten me with nuclear war, we're going to arm ourselves to the teeth and make damn sure that you guys don't slaughter all of us, right? I think it's the only
who threatened nuclear war first? Who murdered President Kennedy in order to get the bomb? I mean, come on. Israel's been threatening nuclear war against the entire world since the mid-1960s.
Wait, I'm sorry. What JFK?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on with JFK?
Yeah.
What happened?
Okay, well, short version of that is that David Ben-Gurion felt that a nuclear bomb program was absolutely an existential issue for Israel. Yeah. And President Kennedy was his number one priority of all of his policies. His number one priority was nuclear non-proliferation and rollback. And the number one place that he was dedicated to doing that was Israel. He was basically dedicating himself to stop it. Yeah. This was when they were well on the road to building it. And David Ben-Gurion then, after coming to loggerheads with Kennedy, exchanging a couple of very subtly, very, very harsh and antagonistic messages, then Ben-Gurion resigned in the spring of 1963, probably to take charge of the project that bore fruition in Dallas that coming fall. The first book on this was by a fellow named Michael Collins Piper. It's called Final Judgment, and it is available free online to read. Okay. And since then, a number of others have taken that up, including the French historian Laurent Guyonneau, who wrote about it in his book JFK 9/11, pointing out that parallels between those two events, both of which were orchestrated from the top in Israel through Israel's organized crime assets in the United States. I highly recommend Piper's book, and especially Guyonneau's is probably better and more concise and better organized. Okay,
so Ben-Gurion, he stepped down in 63?
He stepped down in the spring of 63 and kind of disappeared from public life. And that was the period when Israel's man in the CIA, a guy named James Angleton, probably played the key role in orchestrating the murder of President Kennedy.
Okay. And the Israelis had Kennedy killed so that they could build a bomb? How does that work exactly? Because I thought the Israelis bought... I thought they bought that stuff from France. No? Was that the story?
Well, yeah, they bought equipment from France, and they had their program in Dimona and other places, but primarily Dimona. And yeah, Kennedy was planning to send in American inspectors who were going to tell the truth, and then they were going to basically forcibly shut it down. And so Ben-Gurion saw that this was he thought that getting the nuclear bomb was an existential issue for Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, he did another of these crimes of state. And like I said, it isn't just Israeli leaders that do these crimes of state. It's many leaders have done them, and the neoconservative political philosophers lionize the people who do this stuff.
And why, okay, so take, for example, in 9/11, which I think you're basically saying that either Israel or the Jews or both are behind that as well. I mean, you said Netanyahu was, right? That he was orchestrating all this so that America would wipe out all Israel's enemies in the region, and then Israel, I guess, would go on and conquer and make great Israel, right?
To implement the clean break document from 1997 that couldn't have been implemented without 9/11.
Right. Okay. So how exactly would Israel? I don't know if you know this or you've had people tell you how this worked exactly, but how would Israel have had the sway or the influence to then order someone like President Bush to allow 9/11 to happen, for example? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's obviously above my pay grade and/or security clearance. But my having studied this for a long time and having maybe 50 or 60 books on my shelf about it, and having talked with some former intelligence people, CIA people, Army intelligence people, and stuff like that, my sense is that first we have a pro-Israel propaganda apparatus in the United States that dominates mainstream media. And the biggest reason for this is that people of Jewish ethnicity dominate in those professions. Philip Weiss, former New York Times journalist, high-level journalist who then founded Mondo Weiss, a terrific website, by the way, one of many heroic Jews who are out there telling the truth about these kinds of things. Philip Weiss has talked about how when he worked in mainstream American media, that the majority of his bosses and important coworkers and stuff were Jewish, and that this was the result of natural ethnic nepotism. Weiss says, I just feel more comfortable with my fellow Jewish people, as do many other Jewish people. And so we hire them when we can. And so that's how we ended up with this situation, with the American media in the hands of people of Jewish ethnicity. And then Weiss, his subtitle is, and so what if we Jews do dominate media? And Weiss says, well, the so what is that what this does is it basically massively skews American policy and public opinion in favor of Israel, because the American Jews in American media, despite being by and large liberal in many respects, ultimately do have a kind of reflexive tribal affiliation or whatever, a certain kind of, the us versus them thing going, which ends up they'll always stand up for Israel at some level. And so you've got a media that's definitely not, it's really not going to go there. And if it comes to something like 9/11, the truth of that getting out. And so, but then how do you get the government to go along with it was your question. And well, one way is that the government knows that the media is going to tell a particular kind of story, and that trying to go against that story will get your career destroyed. So that's part of it. Secondly, we have, let's see, I have a whole good collection of books here to show you, but Whitney Webb, which one? This one, One Nation Under Blackmail.
Okay.
And it's well known that America has a very powerful organized crime apparatus. It's well known that during the tenure of J. Edgar Hoover, it had an FBI from 1930s, actually 20s, right up through when he was murdered in the early 70s, that Hoover had files of blackmail photos of practically anybody who mattered. And now, interestingly, a guy named Meyer Lansky had blackmail photos of Hoover, specifically of Hoover engaged in homosexual acts with his boyfriend, Clyde Tolson. Okay. And so the unofficial de facto ruler of the United States of America for many decades was a fellow named Meyer Lansky, who was strongly, he was of Jewish background, had a strong tribalistic sentiment, ended up with a love-hate relationship with the state of Israel when they weren't too eager about inviting him to come and escape the American feds. But anyway, Meyer Lansky had transpired. So one nation of blackmail, people like Jeffrey Epstein. Well, for every one Jeffrey Epstein that we find out about, who is of course working for Israel, right? His Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of Robert Maxwell, Israel's biggest all-time super spy, probably murdered because of what he was up to there. So Ghislaine Maxwell's Epstein's handler. He's getting, setting up all the American movers and shakers with underage kids, taking pictures, and now Israel owns those people. Now Bush, George W. Bush, I am reliably told by a former CIA person and confirmed by another deep state person, was blackmailed. George W. Bush apparently has engaged in some very, very sick and disgusting sexual activity at a Caribbean brothel with children. Noriega actually got a hold of some of those pictures, which is why Bush's father had to send the troops into Panama to destroy Panama and destroy Noriega. That was his answer to Noriega asking for a bigger share of the drug profits. Mm-hmm. So, long story short, large numbers of important Americans are blackmailed. Then we have the campaign contributions. That's what money that runs the American political system comes from wealthy people, donors. About half of that money comes earmarked from Jewish donors whose issue is Israel. Like Chaim Shaban said, I'm a one-issue guy. My issue is Israel. And so that's about half the money that comes into American elections. So we have all of that. Yeah, almost half. Yeah, roughly somewhere in the neighborhood of half.
You have massive corporations that have their own political interests. Like half is Jew money. Come on. Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm told. Okay, there was a book called The Arabists by a Jewish Zionist author named Kaplan, and it was basically a dossier of the State Department people who learn Arabic and they go to the Arab world and maybe they go to Israel and stuff, and they end up siding with the Arabs against Israel because, as Kaplan says, all of them that go to Israel, they end up not liking the Israelis. Regardless of what you've told me, whereas they go to the Arab world and Palestine, and they really love the Arab people and the Palestinians. So there's this problem with the Arabists who are trained in Arab, people like me, actually, I guess. And Kaplan writes this book. It's a dossier on them. And even, I believe in that book, he actually cites some of the statistics, which I've seen in many, many other places. At that time, the Democrats were actually getting a majority of their money earmarked from pro-Israel sources, and the Republicans were getting 1/3. And since then, I think that it's more or less equalized. So that's the statistics that I've seen, and that shouldn't be surprising, because if you look at the Forbes list and all these lists of the richest people in America, you get maybe 1/3 are visibly Jewish, and so given the tribalistic sentiment among many of these people, ordinary Jewish people, that I think that regular, non-wealthy Jewish people are a lot more, all over the map in terms of their views of things. And a lot of them are not very tribalistic and don't care much about Israel, like all of my many Jewish friends throughout my life, pretty much. At the top, the billionaires, the rich people are different. The rich American Jews are almost unanimous in their support for Israel, unfortunately.
So there is some agreement in the way that you and I look at the world, in the sense that clearly there's a lot of stuff that happens at the top that us normal people don't know about, we never hear about, and there's clearly a lot of interests that are moving muscle around political power, behind political power. And for example, right now, the last American election, none of the policies of the Democratic Party make any sense unless you think, okay, actually someone's paying them to do these things and say these things. And that's probably true for Republicans in certain areas of Republican politics. So there's money behind everything. And it is true that there are, wealthy Jews in most societies. The thing is, like, no matter what you do, you're trapped in some kind of a conspiracy, right? Because even if you're in the pharmaceutical industry, say, right, you're gonna pour in money to the people that you think benefit your system because you think that your system, now it's self-serving, but you think that your system is the proper system, the best system, and so on and so forth. So at some point, you do have to take a stand on something, right? You do have to defend American values, Moroccan values, Saudi values, Emirati values, whatever that may be. And to single out this is what I always have. I have a problem with Dan Bilzerian, and I think I have a problem with you in the same regard. Is that this singling out Jews as the only Machiavellian types in this global struggle for power and influence and money and so on. It strikes me as a fraction of the story. Like there are other forces competing for power and influence as well.
Oh yeah,
Arabs as well. Arabs,
absolutely.
Muslim.
No, I don't disagree with you.
Right.
Yeah.
So I wonder why and I know you said that there's the ongoing genocide, which again you and I disagree on that, and also just the entire context of this 100-year history of the conflict. But do you ever?
Wait, do you disagree about what's going on in Gaza being a genocide?
Yes. I
You
don't
disagree with the ICC, the ICJ, the Special Rapporteur, Amnesty International that what's going on in Gaza right now is a genocide. You don't agree with that?
I don't give a flying fuck who's saying what. I just sort of look at the picture as from my own eyes. I have no idea who's saying what or what. I think that yes, some 40,000 people have been killed, murdered, if you want, and it's a war.
And probably 300,000 actually. But
where did you get this 300,000?
Well, all sorts of people, including Ralph Nader, leader of one of the main public interest groups here in the United States, has given that figure. There's tremendous incentive on both sides to underestimate those figures. And those 40,000 people are only those who've been identified. So they're people that have been brought out, that actually have been, found their bodies and been identified. But rather large numbers of people are still permanently beneath rubble. And many others will never be identified, and then many others are blown to bits beyond any kind of identification. Whole families have been wiped out. There's nobody left to identify anybody. So based on the other kinds of avoidable mortality, besides just the military murders of people, you add that to all the people who are still beneath the rubble and so on and so forth, people dying of starvation, hunger, exposure, and disease. And the more plausible estimates, according to Nader and many others, are well into the hundreds of thousands. His most recent estimate now is over 300,000. He talked about 200,000, I think, 6 months ago.
How is Ralph Nader at all an authority on how? I'm not denying that some people might be stuck in the rubble and dead and not accounted for. Who knows what the true number is? I think most military experts think that the true number will never even be known. But how the hell is Ralph Nader able to tabulate 200, 300,000? He doesn't even live there. Like, how is this guy? How do you come up with these figures?
Methodology for? If you want me to, I can send you to an expert who can maybe adjudicate this, and maybe he'll say Nader's wrong. Maybe Nader's too low, maybe he's too high. I don't know. But I'm friends with a Jewish guy named Gideon Polya, who's a scientist in Melbourne, Australia, who's an expert, one of the world's leading experts in death counts and avoidable mortality. And so I'm sure, I've seen some of his work on this. And as I recall, I think it supports something in close to the Nader numbers, but I'm not sure. But I'll be happy to put you in touch with him or forward you his work for the details. But in any case, there's obviously a huge incentive to undercount this from the Israeli side to try to deny their Holocaust, and then from the Palestinian side, because it's a real, for morale purposes, the Palestinian authorities kind of hate to admit it. It's
but Kevin,
what's happened to that.
This is that's part and parcel of the Hamas strategy is to showcase the damage and the catastrophe of Gaza at the hands of the Israelis, to have international pressure and all that kind of stuff, that to highlight the barbarity of the Israelis. I mean, that's been their strategy.
Well, they're sticking with a very low death count. They're sticking with only the people who've actually been identified.
40,000 people is a lot of people, man, and
compared to what's really going on. Yeah, if you look at the satellite photos of Gaza, I mean, it's like the vast majority of buildings have been destroyed, and there's never any warning. The people are in the buildings. I mean, come on.
It's absolute hell on
There's
earth.
2.3 million people live there, and the whole place has been destroyed in attacks designed to kill the people who live there.
So a couple of things. One is, we'll have to see on these data. For now, I reserve the right to be skeptical, but who knows? The one is, Israel could have wiped out Gaza in a week less if they just bombed everything. So I don't understand why they would take all this time, all these measures to tell everyone to get the hell out of dangerous way, corral everyone in a certain area. Like, if they wanted to commit a genocide,
and then kill them. They send them. They tell them this. They send them to safe areas and bomb them in the safe areas. Is what they've been doing.
I know, but they could do that now. They could have done that all this year, and they've killed 2 million people.
No, it's psychological torture. It's like Seligman's rat experiments, where he would torture these rats into what he called learned helplessness. Shock them if they do this, shock them if they do that. Finally, they realize there's nothing they can do. So, oh, here's a safe area, Mr. Rat. Go over here. Shock him. It's inflicting learned helplessness as a strategy to try to create complete destruction of the personality and the will to survive among the targeted population. I mean, that's what they're doing. It's torture and mass murder. But in any case, I mean,
Anyway, I think we both agree that it's a very brutal situation in Gaza right now. What I'm getting at is, at what point does Palestinian leadership look at this, reflect on this, and think, is there a better strategy to take such that we can dramatically reduce the chances that this will ever happen again? Because
like I said,
if it's armed resistance and threatening nuclear war, how do you not expect another devastating war in Gaza again, in whenever the time comes?
Yeah, I don't know how the Palestinians are going to react, but I know that historically, terrorism has not worked so well. I mean, another of my books I was going to show you here is State of Terror by Thomas Suarez. Anyway, Israel pioneered the art of terrorism. So the book State of Terror by Thomas Suarez covers the whole history of how Israel was founded on systematic terrorism to some extent against Jews who were not on board with the ultra-Zionist project, but also against the British and especially, of course, against the native Arab population. And so, the trouble with terrorism is that it's designed to break the will of the targeted population, and that's what Israel's been trying to do to the Palestinians from day one, since long before even 1948. But it doesn't work very well most of the time. I mean, I guess it sort of worked on the Japanese and the Germans, and those are the examples that the Israelis give about what they want to do to their enemies. But more often, it doesn't work. Like Hitler's bombings, terror bombings of London, just he hardened the morale of the British, and the vastly worse and vastly more criminal American and British fire bombings of Germany and Japan likewise did not really break their spirits up. It required utterly crushing those peoples in years of genocidal occupation to get the results that they finally got. But historically, there are so many counterexamples where using terror against these populations leads to multi-generational hatred of the oppressor that just is never, ever going to go away. And that, examples include, there's a book by a guy named Caleb Carr, a professor, passed away a while back, on terrorism. It came out after 9/11. And he goes, one of the examples he uses was the Roman Empire. Against some of its barbarian enemies, used some of these strategies, which famously backfired by creating multi-generational hatred. And as much as a century after terror, after mass slaughter of a tribe to try to teach them a lesson, the survivors came back with permanent hatred in their hearts for Rome. And this sort of thing has happened way more often than these Germany and Japan examples that the Israelis give us. And so there's no way that what's happened here, the whole world has witnessed it in a way that the world has never witnessed any parallel atrocity in all of history. Nothing remotely like this has ever happened before. It's been a live stream genocide. I've been sitting watching this stuff for well over a year, and I'm pretty good at stepping back and, using humor and creativity and things to try to get some distance from it.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you that the billions of other people who are watching this are not going to forgive and forget. So really, there's no way that you're going to get Palestinians or anybody else to, after this, to say, oh, we need a better way. Oh, we suffered so much because we made stupid mistakes, and now we're going to be nice. We're going to let the Israelis steal even more of our stuff, and we're going to allow ourselves to be even more humiliated, and that's going to solve our problems. I don't think so. So what really needs to happen again, and maybe I should go to Israel and become one of these crazy religious nuts that wanders around Jerusalem preaching a religious message. And my religious message is going to be, Israeli Jews, there's only one thing you can do now, and that is get down on your knees and beg for forgiveness, because that's the one thing that will do it, and nothing else will. Every other road leads to hell.
So let's take. I want to take you up on that. Beg for forgiveness.
You're going to bring me to Jerusalem to be a religious nut with Jerusalem syndrome?
No. You know what I mean? But I'm curious. Okay, so you believe that if Israeli Jews beg for forgiveness for the pain that they've caused for the Palestinians is enough to turn a page, to start turning the page?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, in a sense, it's a golden opportunity. There's a book by Kurt Vonnegut called, which not Slaughterhouse 5. One of those Vonnegut books involves the Martians, the Sirens of Titan, I think it is. It involves a fake alien invasion. And these, aliens are brainwashed. They're really humans who are kidnapped and taken to Mars, and they're brainwashed into just basically being zombies. And these poor zombie humans are sent in a fake alien invasion. They land on people's roofs, and the people, like, they're propagandized, and they say, oh my God, the Martians are invading. We've got to kill them. And so the people go up with their shotguns and stuff and blow the heads off these poor zombies on their roofs who don't even know what they're doing. And then when the truth comes out and the people realize that they just, killed these poor people who were really, not Martian invaders and didn't deserve to be killed, this huge, wave of repentance overcomes the whole planet. And that kind of, whatever, it's a good thing. So anyway, that's the sort of thing that I think it really could happen. I mean, honestly, Miko Peled, like, he was brought up to believe that, Palestinians have always been stupid and corrupt and unfair and this and that, and until he actually, looked into it closer, got to know some Palestinians, started hanging around Palestine and actually hearing the other side of the story. And, now he's come to that realization where I'm sure Miko would be happy to go to Israel and join me in this Jerusalem Syndrome project of preaching to Israelis that you got to beg for forgiveness. And this is your chance, because what you just did, Israel, in Gaza, is like, if you can't see that now you need to beg for forgiveness, you're hopeless.
But would you say, I mean, again, I'm just seizing on what you just said right now, that Israelis should hang out with Palestinians more and humanize them and feel for them. And do you not think that the opposite is also true?
Actually, yeah, it is. But, Miko was kind of surprised that simply because he was an Israeli who was actually willing to listen to Palestinians and visit them and be fair in his judgments and be kind and empathetic, suddenly, wow, the Palestinians, all this stuff he'd been taught about them, he realized it wasn't true, that actually these people are ready to go, if you take one step towards them, they'll actually take two steps towards you. Now, after this genocide, I don't know. I mean, it's like, it'd be a crazy time to try it, but honestly, that would at least be possible, because I mean, the two, if you think of it, okay, from your Palestinian perspective, you're a Palestinian, and you've just like had this insane suffering and humiliation and injustice inflicted on you. It's just gone off the charts. Now, at that moment, if you're told, okay, do what we tell you now, or else, how do you react? Or what if you're told, oh my God, we're so sorry, we screwed it. Oh my God, what did we do to you guys? What can we do to make this up to you? That gives you an opening. And if you're Palestinian, suddenly it's like, Yeah. Can I show you some pictures of my sister that died slowly beneath the rubble that you guys paid for, the bombs that did that, and we're cheering for it and all this stuff? And oh shit, and that kind of conversation would work, but a conversation from a position of strength and so on, from the Israeli side, no, the whole world is, this is the problem. Israel is they're winning the battle, but it's the, typical, it's going to be a Pyrrhic victory of all Pyrrhic victories if things keep going this way. And
peace though is made by the strong. I mean, not strong as in I'm bashing you in the head and now you have to do what I say. I mean, both sides have to be strong. In other words, a weak person, a weak man is very dangerous because they're unpredictable and they're vicious and they're bitter and resentful and they have all these sort of demons that are playing in that person's head. A strong person can control those things. And a strong person can say, okay, you might be annoyed at me and I might have done bad things to you, but that's okay, right? I'm human and no big deal. We strive for a better tomorrow, always. And the other person says, okay, fair enough. And I also did some things that, I'm not so proud of. But all that is better than continuing to kill one another and continue to hate one another and also just to blame our problems on one another instead of on ourselves, that's the hallmark of a strong person. So peace is made through the strong. And my concern, and I think you echo some of this, is that if the Israelis continue to kick the shit out of the Palestinians, you call it a genocide, whatever. I mean, it's clearly raising hell in Gaza. And no Palestinians are able to take a look inside and say, okay, let's examine our trajectory here and how did we go wrong, and also just to take a look at our own national story, which is one of essentially victimhood, right? Where history starts in 1948 when Arabs are kicked out of their homes, and as you said, killed and raped and so on in certain cases, and never actually examining, well, we were divided, we were confused, we didn't fight. We had other Arab armies fight on our behalf for the most part, right? Our main leader in the 30s and 40s was a Nazi or a Nazi sympathizer. I mean, these are all really some serious red flags that.
No, I disagree.
Go on.
No, I mean, that's. I think you're kind of projecting your own perspective in a way that the situation with the Palestinians, like the situations of the rest of the people in the global South who were colonized and invaded, whether by the British before the settler colonization genocide of the Jews, that it's similar all over the world. And yeah, I mean, you're right. Palestinians. They weren't, they haven't had the wisdom and the competence of, let's say, the Chinese. But the Chinese were the dominant civilization of the world, and they were utterly destroyed by the Western imperialists in the 19th century, and didn't start coming back until pretty recently, really, the last half century. And so, yeah, the Palestinians and the Muslims in general have not been as confident or as competent as the Chinese, but that's not really, we're supposed to look inside ourselves and say, okay, we didn't follow this particular path of, playing nice and developing our economy and stuff until we could get strong or whatever. Yeah, I mean, some of that, but that's not really the issue. I mean, the real issue here is that there's been this monstrous injustice committed. And when there's just...
Yeah, but I'm talking about the events I'm talking about the events leading up to that as well. Like, you could be confused, or you could be led to believe that in your telling that the Arabs / Palestinians that were living at the time before 1948 were purely peaceful and peaceful collaboration with the Jews, which was not the case. And they were quite hostile. I mean, they rejected several plans to separate the land.
No, but before the Zionist movement, yeah. But the Zionist movement has been a terrorist movement from day one. The Zionist before the Zionist movement, Jews lived perfectly in peace with their neighbors in Palestine and had pretty much forever.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that there were several attempts to have resolved this peacefully, and they were rejected for whatever reason. Yeah, I'm not saying, but just those were that's what happened. And to not take stock of that and say, okay, we rejected these things, and we had a absolutist stance of no, all of this is ours and none of it for the Jews, or something like that. That clearly backfired. And then on top of that, to be not as well organized, not as good in the political game, to be divided even amongst Arab powers themselves, right, between different families. All these things were contributing factors to the defeat. And then, as you've a word you've used quite a lot, is humiliation. Now, I feel for the Muslim world, where they have this glorious and rich history, and compared to, say, the West, they're lagging. And it's also, if you think about this in religious terms, where, I mean, a religion is basically just a map it's a metaphysical map. Follow these core precepts and your life is going to be great. So full of wealth and full of health and good times and family and so on. And if other people's metaphysical map is outperforming yours, well, what the hell is that, right? You're left with some pretty heavy questions there. Now, again, the fact that Islam was at one point the leading light of the world tells me that it can be done again. It's just, it depends on the interpretation of Islam, right? And how much, we had this in our initial email. I said something about jihadis, right? And then you corrected me and you said jihad is a good thing, and it means
greater jihad. Yeah, greater jihad is the struggle to be a better person, and the lesser jihad is the struggle to defend your group.
Exactly. So greater jihad. I mean, if you just take that beautiful term of the struggle to become a better person, a stronger person, and sprout that in one individual, and then let it explode throughout the entire Muslim world, we'd be in a vastly different place than where we are right now. Whereas, and here's where the point I'm trying to make is that, the leaders of the Palestinian national movement have been corrupt, massively so, and even the Hamas guys have been not only corrupt but also ruthless in terms of their willingness to sacrifice civilian population in silly wars. I mean, wars that on paper anyone with a sound mind would realize you can't win this. So don't provoke a war against someone who's got massive air force, tanks, all the stuff that you don't have, and you have no air defense.
Actually, let me correct that in that I think the military resistance strategy, which I would not be one that we would want as our first option, but the basic position of Israel as a widely reviled and widely considered genocidal foreign settler colonial entity squatting in Holy Land that is holy to 5 billion people on earth, perhaps 10 to 15 million of whom, a tiny fraction of whom, are Jews. This outrageous situation can easily be solved militarily by raising the level of insecurity among Israelis to even a small fraction of the level of suffering and insecurity experienced by Palestinians, will cause the most productive Israelis to flee to greener pastures. And it will not be long before Israel empties out of much of its Jewish population in the same way that Algeria emptied out of its French population circa 1960. That military plan is kind of a no-brainer, especially when you have 500 million Arabs in the region who are appalled by this genocide and this desecration, and 2 billion Muslims who are appalled by this genocide and this desecration of their holy landmarks, and this 5 billion people in the global south who are rising rapidly in terms of their power. So the military solution is not only realistic, but it's inevitable if something better isn't found.
But that's precisely what I'm getting at. This has been the case for about 100 years. This has been the plan, more or less. And it's just, if you look at what's going on right now, if you look at how much territory has been lost, settlers in the West Bank, settlements, gulfing up a lot of the land there, this continues to backfire. And it's leading to a point where,
yeah, actually, you're right.
I don't like where it's leading, right? For everyone involved.
I don't either.
Right?
So we're actually in agreement on these points.
Yeah, no, for sure. At some point, you and I, we're gonna have that beer in Jerusalem. But this is precisely the point. I mean, you're saying that the military option, such as it has been constructed, is the way to go, and yet for 100 years, pretty much, this has been totally backfiring. And then on top,
at the very most, 50 years. Really, the PLO starts being a serious entity in the 1960s. So we're a little over 50 years, I guess.
Yeah, but you had massacres in the 30s and the 20s, but okay, fine.
Mainly by the Zionists.
Well, even if you want to call it 50 years, 50 years is a long time, a very, very long time. And the worst part about it is that those who are directing and ordering these things, like Arafat and like the leaders the billionaire leaders of Hamas, they're getting rich. Like you want to talk about dirty laundry? I mean, these guys are stealing money from poor people and then sacrificing them to really devastating wars.
I'm not convinced that the leadership of Hamas and especially Hezbollah are particularly venal compared to other military people. All militaries tend to have a certain amount of venality. Certainly the American one is off the charts. And look at what's going on in Ukraine. But yeah.
What's so galling about all this is that the proportion of corruption there's almost an inverse correlation between more developed and successful countries and then countries like Palestine or any other sort of quasi-failed states. Is that those at the top have way more, like the inequality gap. Also, Morocco. When I went to visit, I mean, granted, this was 10 years ago, but what struck me about it was you would have these magnificent palaces where the king lives, or one of his palaces, and then you have these people who are begging literally right outside the walls of the palace. And that contrast is so striking. Corruption in well-run societies or better-run societies isn't as galling because, yes, the people at the top are doing things and getting paid to say things that are just they're just lying, right, for a living. But they're not doing anything nearly as bad as, the guys at Hamas, right, who, as I said, right, I mean, the GDP has contracted since they took charge. Now, you can fault the Israelis or the Americans or the Egyptians or whatever you want, but at some point...
Wait. When Hamas took charge, they won an election, and the Americans, who are under control of their Zionist lobby, and talk about countries being humiliated. I mean, my country is occupied by Zionists and being destroyed by Zionists too, which is one of the many reasons I'm upset about Zionism. But Hamas won a democratic election, and those who had pressured for democratic elections in Gaza, including the Americans, then jumped on board with this Israeli plan to try to get to pay off and bribe corrupt elements of the Palestinian Authority to go to war to overturn the results of that election. And so the Hamas administration in Gaza has been under attack by these corrupt forces in thrall to gangster Zionism from day one. I view Hamas won that election and generally won the affection and loyalty of the people of Gaza and the larger Muslim world by their reputation for incorruptibility. And I think you are reciting lines scripted for you. I'm not saying you're doing it intentionally, by the propaganda department in Tel Aviv that is trying to push back against this reputation for relative incorruptibility in Hamas and Hezbollah, for that matter. That's how those groups were so successful, is they're the very least corrupt organizations in their societies.
But so you dispute the fact that these guys were living the high life in Qatar and worth hundreds of billions or even billions?
You think Hania was living the high life in those tunnels?
Hania was in Qatar and he was killed in Iraq.
No,
Are you talking about Sinwar?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Sinwar, sorry. So, but yeah, you think that these Hamas people are doing it for money?
Yeah. As sick as it sounds, man.
Well, I think you're drinking your own propaganda Kool-Aid here, and you had a little too much.
I could be, but I don't understand those numbers. Why do they have personal net worth of several $billion? Forget Sinwar for a second, although I don't know how much that guy was worth. But the other guys, I mean, where do they get that money from?
I think when you're running a resistance organization and you have to do it on dark money, you are running it through your accounts that you control. And if Israel says, well, these guys have raised, $2 billion from their supporters across the region, and it's gone through these accounts, and they're the guys who have control of the accounts, therefore their net worth is $2 billion. Well, that money's gone to buy weapons and build tunnels and things like that. So I think it's sort of like calling the head of the American Defense Department a trillionaire because he sits on $1 trillion military budget.
Yeah, but that money isn't under that one person's name. Like when the Israelis were building their state, when the Jews were building their state, it wasn't controlled by one person. There was a whole committee. I don't see what value it brings to have these guys living luxurious lifestyles, lavish lifestyles. I mean, there are actual photos of these guys in private jets. I mean, if you want to say those are doctored or photoshopped, I can't argue or suggest otherwise. But it's again, it's in this.
Yeah, I think that's propaganda. I mean, and B, it's kind of irrelevant whether some political leader has been photographed here or there. I guess with Netanyahu, his getting caught with, he apparently has a taste for the high life and has a lot of sugar daddies all over the world and got caught doing some inappropriate things and has taken a little bit of heat for it, but he's still in command of a genocide. And that has us, but maybe that actually speaks well to Israel in its concern for that kind of incorruptibility, to the point that they were ready to put Netanyahu in jail until suddenly, mysteriously, all of Israel's defenses just disappeared on October 7th, benefiting Netanyahu, keeping him in power and out of jail.
So that one's a weird one.
Yeah, I don't know,
Now,
these resistance movements as a whole have a reputation for relative incorruptibility.
I mean, okay, look, I don't think we're going to find too much agreement on that one. But still, my point still stands, is that I think a deep, hard look at the tactics and the strategy and just the story itself underlying all this is probably in order. I want to ask you a question about because it does strike me. I mean, you said you have like 30 books just on the bookshelf about these kinds of topics. So you do strike me as someone who is
actually hundreds, if you want to count. Well, I have 50 on 9/11 and maybe 75 on Israel Palestine.
There you go. So you do strike me as someone that likes to
many more unrelated things.
Yeah. You have and I mean this totally in a complimentary way, but you have an obsessive mindset as I do as well. I share it with you, and you probably think very deeply about these things. So you ever wonder why it is that Jews, in your in your perception of the world, why it is that they keep showing up in all these consequential events of the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best single book explaining that, since you talk about books, is Laurent Guyonneau's book From Yahweh to Zion, which is a historical excavation of Jewish identity politics. And the short version would be, why is it that every Jewish holiday is the same? They tried to kill us. We won. Let's eat.
Every Jewish
the answer
holiday
to
is like
that,
that. No?
that's just an old Jewish joke. But right, but essentially, Laurent's argument is that the tribal god of this people 3,000 years ago gave them instructions to behave in certain ways, set them apart from their neighbors, keep ritually clean, etc., circumcise this and that, and then view their neighbors as unclean and worshipers of idols and things like that. So the Jewish elite terrorized the ordinary Jewish people into basically going out and smashing the other guy's idols, stealing their stuff, and giving it to Yahweh. Yahweh meaning the high priest of Yahweh, who were the Jewish cognitive and financial elite. And so this a certain kind of mythology was created that has terrorized ordinary Jewish people by giving them this belief that non-Jewish people are scary, dangerous, out to get them, etc. And that this has led to a really strong in-group versus out-group kind of identity that includes a whole lot of paranoia, which then has been, it also generates a certain kind of defensive self-serving behavior, such as lying for one's own benefit and for the benefit of the tribe. And then there's also been a very strong emphasis on the material world, on being prosperous in the material world and having lots of progeny. And so this whole cultural mindset has produced a history of conflict between Jewish people and their neighbors, which the Jewish mythology tells us is all the fault of their neighbors, that everywhere Jewish people have gone, they've always encountered persecution. Why? Well, because they're spotlessly innocent and better than their neighbors. And their neighbors are a bunch of goyim. And there are a lot of uncomplimentary things taught about goyim, of course, and various subspecies of goyim, like Christians and Muslims, Ishmael and Edom. So anyway, so this Jewish religious teaching then has created a political zeitgeist that has basically had the cognitive and financial elite of this tribe has terrorized the ordinary people of this tribe into serving their designs with tremendous in-group loyalty and ethnic nepotism. And this has just, created more friction with the outside world, with the non-Jewish tribe. And that history has, led us to sort of where we are now. The Western world has been, taken, I wouldn't say completely taken over, but certainly grossly disproportionate power has gotten into the hands of tribally loyal powerful Jewish people. And ordinary Jewish people are taught that non-Jewish people hate them and want to throw them into the sea or the gas chambers. And so then they are willing to sign up for the IDF, are willing to, to write letters to Congress or donate a little bit of money or whatever, go to the synagogue and chip in. So you get this paranoid, aggressive kind of tribal behavior that has seized grossly disproportionate power for that tribe, especially in the West. And Zionism is kind of the point of the spirit of this whole supremacist project, which is what it's become. That's kind of, I would probably not a great description of Guyonneau's argument, but it's my cartoonish caricature of it.
Is there a theory in this description of Jews as to how the elites get selected? I mean, how do you separate the ordinary versus?
Oh, sure. It's actually there. Yeah, there's a eugenic component to it. That is, for centuries, the smartest rabbinical student in the ghetto in Eastern Europe, in the shtetl or whatever, would be sent to London to marry Rothschild's daughter, or use whatever names you want for whichever century it was. So, Christians have taken their smartest young men and made them monks and told them not to procreate. Jews have taken their smartest young men and married them to their wealthy young women. And so there's then the cleverest, strongest at achieving material success have kind of risen to the top, realized that it's a good gig, and kept doing what they do, and then manufactured all sorts of excuses for it, neoconservatism being one of the most recent ones.
So Jews have an ability to tell which one among them at a very early age are good at making money? Is that the idea?
No. Just let's if we could talk about like just IQ or whatever, right? I mean, there's a whole theory about
There weren't IQ tests like
China is
2,000 years ago.
another. Okay, yeah. I mean, it's educational systems have always tended to select people who are bright with letters and numbers, and those people get promoted one way or another. Now, Jewish culture, and this is one of its good points, one of its many good points, has always put a premium on education. You know that bar mitzvah involves being able to be literate. So that premium on literacy and emphasis on education has made it possible for Jewish communities to identify their super bright young guys at an early age. They'll become rabbis, become famous rabbis. Some of those people will either get rich themselves or marry the rich guy's daughter, and so on and so forth. None of this is particularly conspiratorial. It's just normal human behavior, right?
No, I'm just trying to follow the argument. So, so Jews identify at an early age the brightest among them, and they elevate them to the top, which I suppose would be a good idea, right? If you want people to lead you, you want the smartest and hardest working people to lead you. And I would personally add also a good moral character, right? But that's even rarer than intelligence and conscientiousness. But okay, and then you're saying that once they get catapulted to the top in this system, right, which calls the brightest, the best and the brightest, which is a good thing, right? And they want to educate as many people as possible. Well, as soon as they get to the top of this elite, then they get this other training where they have to start brainwashing everyone else into.
No. There's a historical progression of situations where, I think, like when you get a population like many Jewish communities. I mean, there have been different Jewish communities in different countries throughout history, of course, but many of them have specialized in certain kinds of professions which involve good ability with numbers and with writing, and such as money lending, tax collecting, being intermediaries in various kinds, and long distance trade with ethnic brethren in other communities, getting good with languages to do that. All these sorts of things. These are sort of middle class kinds of abilities and niches, economic niches in different societies. So these, throughout history, these kinds of situations have Jewish communities have played a certain role in a particular society. There's often been friction with host communities, for instance, especially when usury has become a problem. The same Jewish guys are lending the money and collecting the taxes and foreclosing on the peasants who couldn't pay the taxes because of the usury. And then you get angry pogroms from the peasants, calling on the rulers to expel the Jews, and this sort of thing. This stuff has been going on for centuries and centuries. And then since the liberation of the Jews in the secularization of Europe and the West, Jews have been freed to sort of play a larger role in these kinds of activities in which talent with numbers and letters and languages and so on is rewarded. And so we've had this sort of disproportionate rise of the more higher social level Jewish people to positions of power in Western societies. And a certain amount of ethnic nepotism has accompanied this, of course, as Philip Weiss discussed, and I mentioned earlier. And so, yes, I mean, this is all, I think you probably know this as well as I do. You don't even really need to study it to notice, but it becomes a huge problem now when we have these Western societies being hijacked by these very, very powerful Jewish minorities. and then being forced to support this genocide of Palestine because it's a Jewish ideological project. And the brainwashing of the Western populations to go along with that, is going to create a backlash. I'm part of that backlash. And there's got to be a better way to do this. And again, I think it really begins with a self-reflection on the part of Zionists in particular, and that would lead to repentance.
I tell you what, let's make a deal. Let's make some progress.
Next year in Jerusalem.
Next year in Jerusalem, and the two of us have made a very serious introspective journey, because there are some very serious psychological quirks in both Palestinians and Jews that need to be sort of fleshed out and dealt with. I mean, I do think that there is a paranoia amongst Jews. Some of it is justified, I would add. Like you mentioned the pogroms from people who didn't pay their bills. I don't think that's really a reason to go and kill anyone if you can't handle your own money, say. I mean, I don't think there's a reason to murder anyone, but certainly not being able to handle your own finances would be not at the top of the list. But it can be exaggerated. I mean, one of the biggest beefs I've had with this war is the way that some Israelis or Jews they fall in love with the victimhood narrative, that October 7th happens and the whole world hates us and all that kind of stuff. And I think that goes too far. I don't think I think the majority of people don't care. They've got their own stuff. They've got their own families and things to be worried about. And I think that's human nature, and it's fine. And I also just don't think that's true. I don't think that if you go down the street in any, perhaps not in Muslim countries, but in any other place in the world, and you say I'm Jewish, I don't think that everyone's first reaction is, well, we better kill this person or something like that. They may have some terrible ideas in their mind, but they may not, right? They may just be saying, okay, whatever, big deal, I don't care. And there are quite a lot of people that are fond of Jews, it turns out. Many of them live in America.
Yeah, I was brought up to be fond of Jews, actually.
Yeah, well, you should, right? I mean, we should all be fond of one another. But that love of victimhood as a result of 2,000 years of exile and the lack of sovereignty, it is debilitating, and it does blind you from what's actually going on. I mean, Israel is winning several wars at once. That doesn't strike me as the hallmark of victims, right? I don't think anyone's a victim, but certainly not the Israelis and the Jews, as you said, right, with their inordinate amount of influence and power in multiple societies around the world. I think some of it is justified. I mean, I think if you're smart and talented and hardworking and you're a decent person, you should have more responsibility. I mean, those are the people you should want to have at the top. I'm not saying that every single one of those people who are at these top level positions are smart and hard. Some of them are just, as you said, nepotistic. But in certain societies, people come from nothing and they rise to the top, and that's not by accident. Anywho's, Kevin, this was fun. I'm glad we could talk about this amicably.
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
I know
thanks,
that
Cody.
because if it was in any other context, right, people would be shouting at one another and things like this, and it's really interesting to see how you think and how you put things together, and I'm glad we talked.
Yeah, likewise. It's at times it's frustrating. I admit that I've been overcome by anger by this situation that's been going on for this past year. To some extent, even before that, I discovered the JFK problem when I was 15. I didn't realize Israel did it until 10 years ago. 9/11 got me thrown out of the American Academy, and now I've been debanked and persecuted and deplatformed off of YouTube and all this stuff. And frankly, so I have a personal gripe a little bit that's grown up around this, hatred of injustice. And so, I really hope and pray that you can become a force for justice in the world, and that the people listening to this can too.
Thank you. All right, Kevin. Good talking.
Thanks, Kobe.